Thanks, Michael. Always very thoughtful comments when it comes to talking about public policy and the many factors that go into setting that. Again, public policy not made in a vacuum, but hoping that we can at least learn from things that have been done in the past. Hoping. With that being said, let me turn it over to our last speaker, Christine Malone, who's with us from the City of Ottawa. So Christine, maybe a little bit about yourself and then your talk.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Is the microphone in a good place? Okay, excellent. I get more nervous when I hold the microphone because I end up talking with my hands a lot more and just get more confusing. So hopefully we'll do well here. It's a hard act to follow when you have robots and excellent quotes, and I say it's a tough thing to begin with. For the interest of accessibility, I'm going to try to stick close to my notes. My background is I've had the opportunity to work in the field of disability, being a person with lived experience myself, growing up with a disability. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But I've had the opportunity to work with people in a variety of capacities, mainly in the field of accessing employment. So over a number of years, both here in Ontario and in Saskatchewan, where I'm originally from. I'm proud to say that I'm a proud disabled woman who's also Métis. So that's one of, I like to appreciate Michael's comments around language. You'll hear that I often use the terms person with a disability and disabled person interchangeably. And oftentimes in the environment that I work in as a diversity specialist, we do a lot of training with our staff internally as an organization to build that inclusive approach to things. And in a classroom setting, if I don't know where people are starting from, I'll often start with person first language, but my preference is to have disability pride, and my way of showing that on a regular basis is to use the term disabled woman. So just to give you that context as well. And I always take my cue from the individuals I'm working with. So if they choose different terms, that's what I go with in a given moment as well. First of all, I want to say thank you to the ISSP and to the organizers of this event for including us. I was kind of I feel like I kind of jumped in here at the last minute, so hopefully what I'm saying is not also repetitive, but more or less reinforces what the previous speakers have also said as well. I think it's very important to have these conversations outside of an academic setting and bring it to a public forum such as this, because this is where we really learn and engage with each other from a variety of perspectives. It's interesting, I don't know if you realize, but today, December 10th, is actually the United Nations International Day for the Recognition of Human Rights. So it's a very timely experience that we're having this conversation, because I do believe interaction with your community should be a human right. And technology is a key piece of that discussion, especially as we move forward and become more used to technology and what that means to people on a daily basis. It's also, you may or may not be aware that last Monday, December 3rd, was also the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. So it's a great time of celebration in terms of recognition of the contributions of people with disabilities. And it's very timely because I believe the theme of last week and what should be daily is empowering persons with disabilities and ensuring inclusiveness and equality. So that's kind of the framework which I work from in terms of my daily work and my approach to be here. I'm honored to be here today. First of all, I want to say that I am speaking from my own experience. I do not profess or even try to speak on behalf of anybody else's lived experience with disabilities. Everybody has their own unique approach and their own philosophy that they build around their experience, and that should be valued for what it is. So please don't take my word as gospel. I think it's an opportunity for further discussion. I've had the opportunity both personally to access various tools that have assisted me in my learning and my work life, but also as a professional to assist individuals who are accessing the workforce to look at tools and resources that are available to them. I am also a self-confessed neophyte, so I really have no technological background whatsoever, except for the experiences that I've had the opportunity to have and watch some of the challenges. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of my remarks as well. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my childhood. Growing up in the mid-70s and beyond, I had somewhat of a unique experience in that I was the first child in my area to experience integration into a regular public school. what came commonly known as mainstreaming, I was somewhat seen as a bit of a test case, if you will, to see if this experiment of bringing people with disabilities together with the general population would really be effective. So I always knew that I was somewhat of a this is not an appropriate word, but a guinea pig at the time. I knew that was somewhat of my experience, and I remember being 3 or 4 years old, and my mother said, "Now be nice, because your responsibility is to teach people." And so apparently I took that forward, because that seems to be what I've done my entire career. And we kind of laugh about that today, though it was not intentional. By my background, I'm actually a sociologist and a social worker by training, and I work in adult education for much of what I do in the workplace as well. So it comes all very naturally, I guess you could say. When you're growing up in the late 70s, kind of that burgeoning of technology, it was all a brand new world, and technology was going to fix all the world's problems, right? And it was going to make those with disabilities somehow more acceptable in the world. If you remember back to the movie Back to the Future, at this point we were all supposed to be riding hoverboards and interacting with holograms on a regular basis, right? So that was kind of the approach that many of us had to technology at the time, and so. As a child, it was often seen for a person with myself with physical disabilities and learning disabilities, and more recently acquired brain injury and different things going on, technology was seen as the answer to all problems. It was a way to normalize me in the classroom, which is very interesting. I have slow, fine motor skills, and so things like copying off a board took me a very long time. Technology tools were seen to be the answer. So instead of participating in gym or going out for recess, I would also be sitting on what we now consider an old-fashioned typewriter, the kind you only see nowadays in movies, right? Practicing typing so that I could learn to type and thereby be better able to take notes, and et cetera. And as we move forward in terms of developing technologies, when word processors became available, I was asked to, here, take this new tool, we'll test it out on you, see how it works, we'll teach you. Oftentimes, though, what that did from my experience as a young person was it relegated me to the corner of the classroom. It was the best place for that piece of equipment to fit with a printer, and it was very clear to me at a young age that this somehow flew in the face of the very idea of integration that mainstreaming and being with other children was supposed to bring me. Because all it did, I felt, was make me stand out more. Right? So therein lies the challenge in terms of that discussion. As and this is something that I always kept in mind as I moved ahead, it was very clear to me, and I remember saying to my mom and getting frustrated because I didn't want to use the word processors at certain times, because what 12-year-old wants to stand out amongst their peers, right? And carry around what was not a small laptop at the time. That sort of thing. And I said, nobody thought about me when they were deciding that I needed to use these tools or how it would affect me. And that's something that I've always taken forward with me. So as an adult, it's been very important for me as I gain my own sense of agency and my own sense of piece of this process, was to always include the end user and to look at the perspective of the person who's going to be using that technology. What is their perspective? As I heard by our other panelists, what is their desire to get from this? Is it something that we're imposing upon them, or is it rather something that they're actually looking for? And to engage individuals with disabilities who we actually want to use this technology, to hear how it best is to be used for them, is the best approach to take. Because when I look back on my life, my childhood, and my experience, it was great that they wanted to implement these tools to make me in some ways less disabled. I didn't want to be necessarily to fit in more in that way, but rather I want to be accepted rather than be normal. And so that was one of the challenges that I felt as an individual. Moving into university, I soon recognized that I had other challenges, learning that I processed information differently, and I had learning disabilities. That really impacted my learning process. So I had to develop coping skills and different tools that would assist me in my learning to be able to get the most out of my education as possible. What I did was I carried around a mini recorder, and I would record all my lectures. And then I would go back And for every hour of class, I probably spend 3 to 4 hours listening to those lectures to make notes and integrate the concepts that made sense for me in a way that I could apply them in a real life experience or even a testing situation. Now, even in the mid-90s, when this was still quite a challenge and a philosophical issue for many professors. I had a few professors who actually discouraged me from taking their course because they did not want their lectures recorded under that guise of academic freedom, right? The idea that if somebody recorded their lectures, they were somehow held to verbatim for what they shared. And that was never the intent, as you can well attest to. It was the opportunity to really implement that into the way I processed information best. So that's one of those things to kind of always consider as we move forward. Sorry, I totally went off my notes, and if you're following the notes, you're like, where the hell is she? Well, I like to think that we've moved beyond this idea of stigmatizing people because they use technology. I would like to say, unfortunately, it's still an issue today. And I know of a number of individuals, both through my previous experience working as an employment specialist with people looking to access the workforce, and even in some of the discussions you have in the workplace today, people are really hesitant to come forward with their experience. Employers are sometimes nervous about the idea of implementing technologies that they haven't implemented for somebody else before. So that can act as a barrier to the employment process. And we need to consider that, how we educate the community around this and have those further discussions. But also, job seekers, knowing that employers are a little bit gun shy of the experience of technology, depending on the situation, are more reluctant that way to actually disclose what their needs may be, thereby possibly making them less effective in the workplace and endangering what could be a precarious experience in the workforce in the first place. So we need to consider those things. Having that opportunity to work with individuals, I have seen a few different concerns that I just want to kind of bring to us as well. It's about moving beyond the idea that somebody needs special support, but the fact that we all need supports to be as productive as we can in the workplace. So that idea of, oh, Christine needs this, so it's got to be difficult, and somehow that singles her out. But if we recognize that there's just many people's supports are very similar, so we've naturally built that into the workplace already, right? It's reframing the way we look at such activities. That is really important. I think there's a couple of key things that have been brought up here that I just wanted to reinforce. First of all, the idea that access to technology is equal for everybody is simply not the case. For a number of reasons, persons with disabilities and different sectors of the population of people with disabilities have different access to technology, whether it be the cost of the technology. And yes, $5,000 is cost prohibitive, but for some folks, $500 is still cost prohibitive to the process, right? So it's being aware that cost is an issue, but also functionality. And I think that that's been discussed here about making sure that technology meets the needs of those with a variety of disabilities, from cognitive-related disabilities to physical to sensory-related disabilities, and making sure we're looking at a broad spectrum. Because disability, as a group of people, we are the largest minority in the world, right? And so there's an untapped market of as a developer and provider of service that you can tap into and make a more positive experience from. The other thing that I want to consider is that advances in technology cannot and should not outweigh the ideas of education and the need for social acceptance. Technology will not fix attitudinal barriers and the perception around those things. So we need to continue that education and that discussion as a society within our individual communities and listening to the voices of individuals from their point of view and their various experiences. Technology is a great tool to broaden our understanding. Rather than removing the disability from the person, I see it as an opportunity to embrace the disability and the unique experience that individuals bring to wherever we are. I tend to focus more on the workplace, given the nature of the work that I do, but it stands true for regardless of where a person is, whether that be as a volunteer in the community, as a member of their family, what have you. So there's an opportunity there that we need to look at to go a little bit further. I suggest that persons with disabilities, by virtue of their experience, tend to be innovative, creative, and problem-solving people. By the simple nature of the world was not made for people with disabilities, therefore you have to be that way, right? You need to think about those things as we move forward. The ingenuity of some of our greatest technologies that we now take for granted actually came from the community of people with disabilities. Texting, for example, once was designed as a way for people who are deaf or hard of hearing to communicating using cellular phones, has now become such a ubiquitous part of our day-to-day lives that we don't even consider where that came from, right? So it's as Michael referred to earlier, kind of flipping that idea a little bit on its head as well, taking those opportunities. Seeing adaptive technologies as tools of productivity rather than a way to overcome disability, I think is our new approach that we need to take when we look at technologies and how we interact with members of the public and the disability community when we look at our design and implementation and the overall usability. I think we need to look at the overall mass use. The more we look at our productivity, for example, if I use, in my day-to-day life, I use Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a dictation software. Rather than seeing it as a special tool that this person needs in order to complete their emails or write a document, if everybody had that tool, suddenly the cost of that would go down because the demand is higher, right? And it allows for more innovation because we're now looking at alternatives and choice in the market in a way that we don't currently have. So we have those opportunities as a society, as a community, come together and look at those different approaches to have a more cohesive impact, I would say. I'll just end my thoughts by saying the insight and experience of persons with disabilities must be embedded through the development and integration of technologies, not as a tool to limit disability, but to embrace it. Last week at the United Nations Day of Persons with Disabilities, Minister Carla Quattro said, "Nothing without us because everything is about us." And I think nothing is truer than that than in the world of technology.